So you just picked up a Z5 or you just ordered one or you're excited to have one and you want to go through that super fun, nerdy exercise of setting it all up. How do you do that? How do you make it the best for you? I'm going to show you what I do. We're going to go through all the custom settings, all the menu stuff, everything you need to know to set this up to be like a total power horse. So just grab yourself power horse, grab yourself a cup of coffee and relax and let's go through it. So the way we're going to set this up is first we're going to go into our menus and then we're going to look at our display, our quick menu, and then our custom function buttons, and we'll do that for photo and video. We won't go through every single thing, just the things that I think are necessary. So storage folder, leave that the same. File naming, for me, because I have several different cameras and I like to be able to differentiate things, I set this to CT5. Chris Tea's 5, because this is the Z5. I don't have the Mark 1, so I don't have to acknowledge that it's the Mark II, which is fine. And then for my ZF, I have it set up to CTF. And then for my Z6iii, I have the CT6 is how I have those designated. Role played by card in slot 2. So this is basically saying, do you want it to act as an overflow, meaning that if you fill up the first card, it starts writing to the second card? Do you want it to be backup, which is basically known as redundancy? So if you are shooting, you have a copy made to both card slots, which is really important for professional work. Do you want it set so that you have RAW on one and JPEG on the other, or do you want JPEG on both? And when you do go to the JPEG slot 2, you can adjust what size you want to. So you could, in theory, save like a large JPEG to one and a small JPEG to another, but it doesn't really matter. The way that I have it set up, if I'm shooting for fun, I have it set to RAW slot 1, JPEG slot 2. If I am shooting professionally and it's stuff that I want to make sure I don't lose, then I set it to backup. So generally speaking, let's say you're shooting professionally, set it to backup. So let's just do that for now. Image area, this is where you can choose your different crops. So you can have it in the full, you can have it in the APS-C crop mode, a 1:1 or a 16:9. We're just going to leave it in full. Tone mode, this is between SDR and HLG. I would just recommend keeping it in SDR. Image quality. So generally speaking, the way that I have this set up is that I will shoot in RAW plus JPEG, and usually I do normal star. For the sake of the reviews I'm doing in this camera, I'm doing fine stars so that we can get the highest quality JPEGs possible. But generally I find that normal star is really good. So this is what I would recommend. Image size settings. Large, I tend to shoot in large. I don't shoot medium-sized JPEGs. I shoot full-size JPEGs. ISO sensitivity settings. So this one is important if you are going to be shooting in any kind of auto ISO situation. So whether that's an aperture priority or whether you just want to set your ISO to auto and keep everything else manual, which is what we're in right now. So we're in auto ISO. So you turn that on and off here. You can also map that to a button, namely the ISO button. And then from here, you can choose your maximum sensitivity. So you can say, I don't want it to go past, we could say, I don't want it to go past 12,800, for example. We're going to keep it where it was, which is just using right up to 64,000. And then you can do the same thing with flash. And this part's really important. So this is the minimum shutter speed. For me, for the stuff that I shoot, I like to have a minimum shutter speed of 1/250th of a second. What that means is that when this is in auto ISO and auto shutter, so if you're in aperture priority mode, it will not allow the shutter speed to go below 1/250th of a second, so long as it has the room in the ISO to do so. So let's say we're shooting and the ISO can choose to be at 1600 or it can choose to be at 3200, but if it goes to 1600, it would have to drop the minimum shutter speed down below 250th. It will choose to go up to 3200. However, if it's maxed out, so let's say it's at 64,000 and it still is too dark, it will drop your shutter speed. So just keep that in mind. But that's a pretty fringe case. You probably don't have to worry about too much. Quick little pause here. If you're liking this, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear how you have things set up. Subscribe if you're not already subscribed, all that stuff. But just let me know what's going on. I'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Tell me stuff. Let's talk. Okay, back to the video. White balance. Bunch of different white balance options. Experiment, see what works for you. Generally speaking, I keep mine in auto 1, keep overall atmosphere. Auto 2 is nice too, that keeps warm colors. Or If I am shooting a lot of street stuff, I tend to be in either direct sunlight or cloudy. Same thing with weddings. So I can just have a consistent white balance the whole day. But you can also go through and you can choose a bunch of different ones. You can even, set the temperature manually if you want to, or you can do a preset based on a photo. We don't have any photos here to do that on, but that would be something you could do. So you basically just go into the preset manual, you pick a photo, and then it will choose to set the white balance based on that photo. Set picture control. So I have a few different custom picture controls here that are fun that I enjoy using. You can definitely experiment with that. If you go on to the Nikon the NX Studio app, you can play with that. But you have a whole bunch of different ones to choose from here. So generally speaking, I'm going to keep it in either standard, or I also like shooting in rich tone portrait or monochrome. Those are going to be my three. And I do have some presets that are based on some of those, but we'll keep it in standard for now. Again, this is just your flavor. This is only going to affect the JPEG. It could also affect the preview of the RAW file, depending how you have your Lightroom set up. But generally speaking, you're only affecting the JPEGs here. So that is something to keep in mind. I think if you go to something like neutral or like flat, that'll probably give you the truest sense of what the RAW would look like on its own. But for me, when I am taking a photo, sometimes during a session, I want to be able to show it to the person I'm photographing. And if it's in flat, it just doesn't look very nice. I find like standard or rich tone portrait both look good. Manage picture control. So this is where you can go through and you can actually customize things. So if you wanted to add a new picture control, you could do that here. You go to load/save, copy to camera, and then these are a few that I have set up here. So let's just pick one, rich tone portrait. I would put it into C4, and then I can rename it if I want to, and we'll go okay. And then when we go into our custom picture control, which you can do by using the custom picture control button, we will be able to actually see that it's in there. So if we were to slide over, we could see right there, we have rich tone portrait film. Now we're in a funny orientation here, but you get the drift. Color space, unless you're doing a ton of printing, maybe you want to change that to Adobe RBG, but generally speaking, sRGB is the safe one to go with. Active delighting, what this is going to do, this is only going to affect your JPEGs with a caveat. So basically what this does is it brings down the highlights and brings up the shadows a little bit, and it does that through increasing the ISO so that it can actually do those computations in the camera on your JPEGs. Keep in mind, it will affect your RAW files insofar as it will affect the exposure. So your RAW file will then be potentially overexposed if you bring it into Lightroom. It doesn't affect the actual RAW file in terms of the computation that's doing on the JPEG, where it's like shifting things and changing the highlights and the shadows. It doesn't do that, but it does affect your exposure. I do use this sometimes with certain presets that I have developed and stuff like that, but generally speaking, I would keep this either off or maybe set to normal. You might find that actually makes it look a little bit nicer on the screen, which can be helpful too. Just keep in mind it will affect your exposure a bit. Long exposure noise reduction, we're not gonna do anything with that. High ISO noise reduction, I also keep that off. I don't like to add any noise reduction. I would rather do that myself. Vignette control, this you can set to whatever you want. This is basically just when you put different lenses on, it will adjust and help with the vignette that you get from certain lenses. It doesn't really matter all that much. Again, it's only going to affect your JPEG. Diffraction, compensation, auto distortion control, just leave those on. Skin softening, I keep off. Portrait impression balance off. Photo flicker reduction, I actually, I will use this when I need to, but this is a pretty easy one to just leave on. It doesn't really affect things too much as far as I know. I could be wrong about that. It's more the high frequency flicker reduction. So this will allow you to do like fine tuning of the shutter speed rather than going from like the standard jumps. It'll allow you to really fine tune it. I use that in video, not in photo so much. Metering. Okay, there's 4 different types. There's matrix metering, which takes into account the entire scene that's in front of you. There's center weighted, which takes into account just the sort of like center part of your frame. There's spot, which basically takes into account the exact center. And then there's highlight weighted metering, which will meter relative to the highlights. So basically, if you have a lot of highlights, it's just going to bring down everything. Flash mode, we won't go through this too much. If you are using flash, then obviously you're going to want to adjust some things here. But overall, Flash compensation, you can bring it up or down based on how the flash is reacting, but you can do a lot of that stuff through your flash too. So that's something to keep in mind. Focus modes. Okay, so I am pretty much always in AFC. Sometimes I'll be in single autofocus or manual autofocus, but it kind of lives in AFC and then I go from there. Autofocus area mode. As a standard, this is a pretty trustworthy camera, so I go with auto area AF. I do have a button set up to switch that, and you'll see that in a little bit, but standard for me is auto area AF. You can also do like custom wide area AF where you can actually change what you want the camera to focus on and the size and all that, which is really cool. But generally speaking, I am using auto area AF. I would use this, let's say I want to really focus on, if I'm shooting a wedding and I just want to focus on what's going on the aisle, I could essentially set it to here and then it would ignore everything else going on outside of that and it would just focus on the people going down the aisle. So that's actually pretty awesome that they have that. AF/MF subject detection options. So this is where you can decide if you want to focus on people, animals, birds, vehicles, airplanes, or if you just want to turn subject detection totally off. I have it set to auto. If I know I'm just going to be shooting dogs, for example, I might set it to animal. Or if I know I'm going to an area where there's a bunch of dogs, but I want to focus on the humans, maybe I'll just set it to people. But auto seems to do a pretty good job. Manual focus subject detection area. This I set to all, basically just meaning that if I'm in manual focus, it will still detect subjects, which is actually super helpful. And then it'll put a little green box around them when they're in focus. So I keep that on. Vibration reduction, I set this to normal. I don't set it to sport. You could use that if you want to. That's just going to help with your IBIS. Auto bracketing. I don't turn this on because if you turn it on, it's just going to start doing it. But I do have a bracket setting in my eye menu, which you'll see in a little bit. Multiple exposure, same thing. Interval timer shooting. So this is kind of cool. Basically with this, you can tell it when you want to start taking photos, the interval you want them to take it, all that kind of stuff. That's probably beyond the scope of this video though. Same with time-lapse video, focus shift shooting, pixel shift shooting. That's basically where it moves the sensor a tiny little bit a bunch of times so that I can get a very large file. Again, not really super necessary. Moving into the video recording here. Storage folder, I mimic what I did before. Destination, you can only write video to one card slot, which is super annoying. It's a Nikon thing and I don't understand it, but that's what it is. Video file type. Okay, so I am shooting in H.265 in 10-bit. You can also record in RAW, which is pretty cool. But from here, if you move over, you can choose between standard SDR, or you can go into HLG, or you can go into NLOG. NLOG has an 800 ISO base, so just keep that in mind. And obviously you want to learn how to expose for NLOG and all that kind of thing. We will keep it in standard for now. Frame rate size, I shoot in 4K 24p. Image area, we're going to do the same thing we did before, keeping that in full. I do like to have this, the DX crop alert on, so I know if I've punched into my crop, which is very helpful. ISO sensitivity settings, maximum sensitivity is 51,200, and then the base is 800, and this is helpful if you are shooting an NLOG. White balance is the same as with photo, with a caveat. I do have a custom button set up to do auto white balance lock, which you'll see. Picture control, again, this is something you can experiment with. I find that neutral or flat give me a lot of movement later, and I can do a lot with that in editing. So I use those a lot. Sometimes I use rich tone portrait or standard as well, but neutral is kind of my way that I go. Flat is even flatter than neutral. So we'll set that to neutral for now. Manage picture control. This is where you could, in theory, then also upload your picture profiles and stuff like that. Active delighting, I actually do tend to turn this on. I set it to normal, and I find that that does help. This will affect the file, though it's not like with JPEGs. This will affect your video, so keep that in mind. I just keep it on because, generally speaking, I find it does a good job of balancing out my highlights. Everything else I kind of just leave standard. Metering, I am doing full matrix metering unless I need to get a specific look, and then I do have a button set up to do my metering for me. Focus mode, we're going to do AF full-time autofocus, and I find that works better than the continuous. AF area mode, same thing. We're going to keep this in auto area, and then it does have subject tracking, so I will bounce between those as I need to. Product review mode, I haven't really even used this, to be honest, but this is here. So this is basically if I hold something up to the screen, it will focus on that, and then it'll automatically focus back onto me. You can also customize the area that you want it to be. So if you know that your product is always going to be in like this little section here, in theory, you could just set it to that, and that's what it'll prioritize. Pretty cool. We're not going to use that. Manual focus subject detection area, same thing, keep that on all. Video self timer off, vibration reduction on. Microphone sensitivity, I find for most of the mics that I use, a good base point is setting this to 8. And that's if I have a mic set in. If I'm using the mics that are on the camera itself, I might set it to auto. But manual, I set it to 8 as my starting point, and that seems to work pretty well. Always keep wind noise reduction off. Don't do that. There's time code here too, which is something that you can do if you're using multiple different cameras. Okay, we're gonna blitz through this here. Focus. I have it set up so that my AFC priority selection, meaning that when I'm in autofocus continuous, I want it to prioritize focusing and releasing when I hit down the shutter to the same degree. If you set it to just focus, it will make sure that it's focused before it takes a photo. If you set it to release, it will prioritize taking the photo over having perfect sharpness. With AFS, a little bit different. I have it set to focus. Focus tracking with lock on, I keep this where it's at. Sometimes you might want to adjust with this. This basically helps you fine tune your autofocus settings when you have people going in front of the camera and stuff like that. Autofocus points used, I use all points. Store points by orientation, keep that at focus point. AF activation on, autofocus point persistence. I don't even know what that means. Limit AF area mode selection. So this is helpful if you are like, okay, I am never going to use dynamic area. I'm probably never going to use wide area small. I will use some of my customs. I will use wide area F large and 3D tracking and auto area. So these are the ones that I'll actually use. So I can turn the rest off. Focus point wraparound. So if this is on, it means that when you get to the end, if you're like shifting over the focus point, if you get to the end, it'll wrap around to the other side. I don't like that, so I keep it off. And I also have my OK button set up to reset so that it goes back to the center. Focus point display, I have this on because I like being able to see my focus point. Focus peaking, this is something that I have set on because if I do go over to manual focus, I do want to use that. For me, I use blue. I find blue to be easier for me to see, but choose whatever you want. Focus point selection speed, I keep this normal. If you set to high, it'll move around a lot faster, but I find normal is good enough. And we're on to our exposure. Third of a step of values. What do we actually need to know about here? There's not really much in the metering or exposure that I find I ever change. So we'll go through that. Same with this guy here, self-timers, all that stuff. You can set that however you need to. Let's go over this. So CL shooting speed. So this is in your continuous low. What do you want the speed to be? I have mine set to 7, but we're actually going to bring that down to 5. I find that's more than enough. Maximum shots per burst. This is basically saying you don't want the camera to allow you to take more than 200 shots. Pre-release. Pre-release only works with JPEGs, but basically what it means is that if I put pre-release on, I can have at least up to 1 second's worth of pre-release photos taken. So if I have the shutter button depressed halfway, it'll start to record photos in JPEG. And then a second I actually hit the shutter down, it'll take the photos I want, but it will save all of the ones that it took for a half second or a third of a second up to a full second before I actually press the button. And it'll just clear that buffer if you're not actually taking the photos. We're not going to use that. But it's a cool thing for like birding or sports or stuff like that. The rest of this, I keep the same auto for my shutter type. So I let it bounce between mechanical and the electronic front curtain shutter if I need to use it. Starlight view, this is helpful for astrophotography. It's also helpful if you're using a third-party flash that's not actually made for your camera. If you turn this on, it'll kill all the exposure preview, which the camera does automatically when it senses a flash, but the flash has to be one that is made for Nikon. It can be from other brands, but it has to be made specifically for Nikon. Otherwise that won't work. So Starlight View helps. Okay, custom monitor shooting display and custom viewfinder shooting display. This is where you can actually turn on and off all the stuff. So I tend to turn off this one because I never use it. So this one will give you basically everything. This one is slightly more simplified. This one has your horizon lines and your histogram. This one is off. But you can also customize all of these. If you go over, you can put in whatever you want on all of these. So lots of customization you can do there. Same with the viewfinder. And you can actually have them be slightly different, which is cool. This next set, we're actually going to go over this after. So we're going to come back to this because this is all of our customization. So we'll just quickly jump into our video stuff. So where we can customize our controls, we can do a control lock. So if we want to make sure that like our shutter speed never changes, we can put shutter speed lock, stuff like that. We can actually change our autofocus speed and sensitivity. So how fast it moves around. Also how sticky it is, essentially. From here, we can also throw in, so something like View Assist I think is really helpful. View Assist will help you if you're shooting an N-Log. It will actually put like almost like a Rec 709 LUT on the monitor so that you see a better idea of what your actual exposure will end up being. Zebra pattern, so this is where you can actually adjust, and it's cool. It has two different patterns, right and left, but it also has a mid-tone range as well as a highlight threshold. If you want to check out some more detailed stuff on that, there's a couple of different people I would recommend. Check out Josh Satin's channel. Check out Gerald and Dunn. They're both really good for stuff like that. And the rest of this is kind of up to you. Brightness information display, if you want to have a waveform, if you want to have a histogram, or if you want to have a large waveform. I find, generally speaking, like the histogram is what I like to use for photo, and the waveform is what I like to use for video. Moving down quickly, there's literally nothing I ever changed in the playback menu. Here, there's almost nothing I ever change. This is where you might just want to do like clean image sensor. You can also, all the way up here, you can format your memory card, save user settings. This is actually helpful because you do have 3 different user banks. So this is where you can set up that so you can have several different types of shooting. So if you tend to shoot very differently for sports versus how you do portraits, you can save them here. Finally, the network, this is where you're going to get into things like accessing the Nikon Snap Bridge, Bluetooth settings, all that kind of stuff, FTP, those sort of things. And finally, you have your My menu, which you can set up. We're not going to set that up today, but that's something you can do. All right, so getting back into our custom settings menu, so that's the little pencil there. We're going to go into F for controls. We're going to go back up to the top. And we're going to go to Customize Eye menu. So I'll show you quickly how I have things set up here. I've got autofocus, manual focus. Beside that, I have my area subject detection. So this is like where you can choose what you want to use in terms of your area mode, and then as well as what type of subjects you want to focus on. I do have a button map for that, but I find it's just helpful to have it here too. My ISO sensitivities, my metering, white balance, and all of those, like a lot of them I actually have custom buttons for, but for times when maybe the camera's facing me or something like that, or I don't want to use the buttons or I can't access them very easily, that's where this is helpful. I also always have my multiple exposure. I rarely use multiple exposure, to be totally honest, but I like having it quickly available. I've got my drive settings. This is where I also have that auto bracketing that I was talking about. And then right here, this is super helpful. This is your custom control. So if I press on this, I can automatically change my custom controls, which is helpful. From here, choose image area. So this is how I can go into my crop mode if I want to, active delighting if I want to turn that on, and my picture controls. So that's how I have it set up for photo. Video, you pop down into G here, and we're going to go all the way back up to the top. And I'll show you what that looks like. For this one, I have things pretty close to how they're set up right when you get the camera out of the box. Basically, I have my image area, my frame size and frame rate, so I can change the type of frame rate if I want to go into like 60p or something like that. My ISO, my audio, all of my autofocus settings that I need. I have my metering, I have my zebras, peaking, custom controls, vibration reduction, and picture control. So these are the things that I find helpful to have here right away. I don't want to go too in depth into each of them. Basically, they do what you think they do. So the next one that's really important, and this will be very helpful for you to set up on your own, but definitely here's some inspiration for you, the custom controls for shooting. So this is actually all the buttons, what all of them do. So it'll highlight yellow the button you're actually changing. And here's how I have mine set up, really nice and quick. I have my white balance set up here. So when I actually press that custom function, I hold it, I can adjust my white balance. Right below that, I have my autofocus subject mode settings. So this is where I can adjust things if I want to go into a different type of autofocus. I like having that really easy and quick. The next one we don't have to worry about because we are not doing vertical shooting because we don't have a grip, but that is something you can add. This one here, so my autofocus on button, what I actually do is I set that to 3D tracking. There's a way you can set it so it automatically starts tracking the second you hit it, but I prefer to have this set so that it bumps into 3D tracking, and then from there I can just half press down the shutter, and that's how I can adjust things. I find bouncing between the all area and then that to be really, really fast and effective. Display button I keep as a display button, drive as a drive. My joystick, I actually have the center button set up to switch eyes so that if I'm doing like a portrait session or something, I can just press that if it's not focusing on the right eye. I know that seems weird, but it's just sort of like something that I have to do because I'm sort of limited in certain buttons, and because I do a lot of portraits, that's what I prefer. The OK button will reset the focus point. So if my focus point is far away from the center, if I just press that, it'll go back. And the rest of them I keep the same. So we don't really have to go over those too much. The ISO, basically the way that this is set up, if you're hitting the ISO button and you use the front dial, you can change it from auto or manual. And then the back dial here is going to adjust it in terms of the ISO sensitivity. And everything else is the same. If you have custom buttons or focus rings you want to use, you can do that here, but that's how I have it set up. Going into the video, custom controls, I have this set up slightly differently from how I set up my photo controls. I keep the white balance the same, but then the bottom button, rather than being my subject functions and stuff like that, I actually have that set to an auto white balance lock, because a lot of times when I'm shooting video, I don't want my white balance to change in the middle of the scene. So if I just press that button, it'll automatically lock my white balance. So it's sort of like using a manual white balance in a way, in that you're not getting that adjustment happening all the time. So you can be an auto white balance, get the white balance based on what the camera thinks, which I think is usually pretty close, and then just hit that button and you know that you don't have to worry about your white balance changing. AF on I have set to AF focus mode. This is where I change things. I typically am not changing my focus areas quite as rapidly when I'm shooting video, so I don't worry about jumping into 3D right away. Everything else is pretty much the same, other than I switch this, rather than being switch eyes, which is what the center button is for my photography. This is how I turn on and off my zebras. Everything else, totally the same. There you have it. Your Z5ii is set up. It's ready to go. You're ready to go shoot and have some fun. Let me know in the comments what you think. How do you set yours up? Do you do your things differently? Do you do them similar? I'd love to hear it. See you later.